Well, it is the afternoon now, so good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
We are on, let's see, Thursday, May 30th, 2024, at our local planning agency. So I'm calling this meeting to order. We've already done the Pledge of Allegiance earlier this morning at 10:02 a.m. maybe 10:01 a.m. In our planning and zoning. We've done the cell phone announcement. No need for a roll call. We have the same attendance minus Christopher Downing. He has needed to depart, so we can get right into the presentation of items. We have a review, 6.a, review LPA Resolution 2024, which recommends approval of Ordinance 2024-03, amending Section 3-4, proximity of establishments to church or school exception by removing the 50-room requirement for hotels from the exception, amending Section 68-302 to correct a codification error, amending Section 68-484, accessory uses in motels or hotels to distinguish between accessory uses and incidental services. So with that being said, and I think that that is something that we had reviewed before. It was sent to commission and then sent back, so everyone should be very familiar with it. And being that I never have made LPA notes, I think I go into staff presentation.
All set?
Have at it.
So you are correct. This was actually brought before you guys back in March 21st of 2024, and you recommended approval to the City Commission. Just as a reminder, what was brought to you was Section 68-484, which basically states that incidental services used in connection with either hotels or motels, including cigar and candy stands, restaurants and lounges, personal service shops, and similar uses may be permitted by special exception, provided at least 50 hotel motel units shall be contained within the building. So what was brought before you was removing that 50-room requirement so that any hotel could have a small accessory use. So we brought that to the commission. There was also a caveat in there that only 10% of the floor area could be used for incidental services. So the commission asked us to kind of reevaluate that 10% to see if it needed to stay in. So we kind of looked at it and we made the determination based on the definition of an accessory use, and there's another section on accessory uses general, which kind of says that it has to be customarily incidental to or subordinate to the principal use. So any accessory uses we approved would not be the primary use on the property. So we determined that we could remove that 10% with the exception of alcoholic beverage establishments. We left that in there as just a straight, you could only have 10% for an alcoholic beverage establishment. There were a couple other changes that we made. One was to correct an error in the codification of the code. And then we kind of did we better defined the difference between accessory use and an incidental services to make that a little bit more clear. So that's kind of what's before you right now.
Does anybody have any questions? I mean, I'm all for it because I think it just helps business owners.
So am I. I think that's the intent. Yeah, I like it.
I mean, you can't, you know, if you're it just helps business owners and of having.
One of the biggest complaints that you hear from these business owners: how do we keep people here? So we've got to add something to have that they can offer.
Is there any pending like applications, Catherine, where this impacts them, or I mean, are they aware?
We've had discussions with several hotels that this 50-room was a limiting factor, so there are two that I'm aware of that would like this change.
Okay. And when it comes to the change that we are proposing, I mean, they've I guess my question in regards to, all right, let me hit the reset button. My apologies. In regards to the hotel community that we currently have in place, is the majority of the feedback for this type of change that we're trying to implement?
I don't really know the answer to that question.
Okay.
All I can talk about is new proposed hotels
Okay.
or remodels of existing hotels where they want this change in order to be able to have a restaurant or a bar.
Okay, so the stuff that has been pending, they like where this is headed?
Yes.
Okay, and they've seen the updates to it type thing?
Probably only in today's agenda packet,
Okay,
but I think they're aware of it.
okay,
We've kept them aware.
okay, thank you. And, sorry, I just have one last question.
Yeah, go.
Does the commission know of the revisions? So, the
Yes.
commission sent it back.
Yes.
They're aware of the revisions that we now are reproposing? Because the last thing I want to do is
Send it to them again.
send it to them again,
Have it
and
come
then,
back.
Come back.
and they kick it back to us.
Yeah, I believe they've all had a chance to take a look at it.
Okay, good? All right. So we will go to, we did, anything additional?
Now, ready to
Does
move.
staff have any real concerns about this?
No.
No,
I don't.
no, no, we talked it over
Yeah.
a fair amount. I mean, I think provides a little more flexibility.
Okay.
You know, so ultimately up to them to decide how big they want to go, but, I mean, they obviously can't go above the primary use, but
Right.
I think we spent a lot of time on this one, so.
Okay.
I'm willing to make a motion.
Okay. I don't have any, well, hold on. Yep, so I don't have any cards. Is there anybody making public comment today on this item? Great, and I will entertain a motion.
Okay, I move to approve Resolution 2024-04, which recommends adoption of the revised ordinance of 2024-03 to the City Commission.
Second?
This is a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Michael Hurtubise,
Yes.
Diana Crable,
Yes.
Marvin Sheff,
Approved, yes.
Ross Sanchez,
Yes.
Gary Potenziano.
Yes.
Sorry. A motion by our fabulous Diane Crable and seconded by Mr. Michael Hurtubise. Passed? Good? Awesome. I'm usually thanking somebody like, go build your building, or go sell, go do your thing, like,
Yeah, we're all a little thrown off.
go submit your applications, people. The city of Treasure Island needs businesses, come on. All right, we do have one more item. 6B, workshop to review draft ordinances for Chapter 8, Building, and Chapter 66, floodplain management. You ready? This is you?
Yes.
All right, you're up. You have all of our ears.
Good afternoon. So we're bringing back in ordinance form things that we've discussed at previous workshops for Chapter 8, which is building, and Chapter 66, which is the floodplain management regulations. Big picture overview, a lot of things moved out of Chapter 8 and into Chapter 66. You will see them struck through. It doesn't mean they disappeared. There was two main reasons for that. One is that a lot of the things that were in Chapter 8 are already in the Florida Building Code and did not need to be locally adopted because they have subsequently been implemented into the building code. So like half of them kind of went away, and I'll go through it. And the other half went to Chapter 66, the ones that are specific to Treasure Island. The state has a new plan, which they call plain language, where they like these amendments to stay in the floodplain code and not in the building code, which has to be readopted every time they update the building code, potentially. And so they wanted something that had a longer life. We are making changes to Chapter 8 to say the currently adopted building code rather than citing a specific year. But there still may be other changes that come through that have to result in a change to the building chapter. So I gave everyone a packet of this printed out that matches the one I have, so I can go by the page numbers in the bottom right corner. And I just wanted to go through the changes with you, if that's okay, so we can kind of highlight how everything that we talked about with Justin has become in ordinance form. Chapter 8, there are some problems with this draft that you have as far as the numbering and the section numbering, and there's one outstanding question on the fire code, so we will be correcting that from this version that you see, but basically, this is final language. So the first change you'll see is on the packet in page 20. And that is the change that I mentioned earlier, where we're getting rid of a specific edition of the building code and just saying the currently adopted Florida Building Code. That rolls over onto the next page. You'll see it also rolls into the National Electrical Code. And you'll see it one more time on the next page where it struck out of the local administrative amendments. We also got rid of the reference to 2020. Then we skip on over to everything remains the same until we get to page 25. And so the change there is we used to have the whole process for an owner-builder permit called out in our Chapter 8. That is actually in the Florida statutes, and that changes from time to time at the state level. We're going to reference that instead, rather than adopting that locally, just to make that cleaner. So that covers the next 2 pages, 3 pages. Next change is on page 28. These are where the changes start from the things that were moved out of this section and moved into the floodplain code, or were redundant to the Florida Building Code. So you'll see where it says see Chapter 66 in the middle of that page. That means these requirements move to the floodplain code. Then you will see, not word for word, but generally these requirements move to the floodplain code. We added a new section to go to the floodplain code talking about definitions. That's where you'll see substantial improvement and those other things that we talked about. We'll go through that in floodplain. Next one went to Chapter 66 on page 29. The next 2 actually went to Chapter 66. Well, next 4. We're up to page 30, page 31. They went to Chapter 66. The ones that are simply all struck through, those were redundant with the Florida Building Code. Where they didn't say, see Chapter 66, those are just gone because they're already in the Florida Building Code. So then we get to pretty much the end of this, and that is the fire code. We are still working with the fire chief and fire inspector just to make sure we've got the right citations in here, but it's just referencing the currently adopted version of the code in any local amendments. So that's basically it for Chapter 8. Is there any questions or comments or discussion on that?
No, it just seems like it's more of kind of like a reshuffle, retitling type thing to make sure it makes accurate sense.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Really no fundamental changes in
Yeah, so
there,
there's no
other than
no
referencing some things that go in Chapter 66, like definitions that were, some of them moved,
Okay.
and some, they were also enhanced, because some things were not defined in reference to the building code.
Appreciate you.
So, I know it's been a long day, so I'm gonna go pretty fast, but please let me know if you have questions.
That's fine.
For Chapter 66, that starts on page 35 of your packet. So the first change is on page 37. You'll see we have a new address, as you all know. You'll see that we now reference the terrain modification manual. That will actually be adopted as part of our code. So when you see a reference to this, it's just referencing another part of the code. The terrain modification manual, we've been over it in very general,
Yeah.
large picture form. It's a very long document, very complex, as you know. So we will definitely be bringing that back to you in a final form with more discussion about that.
So, I have a question.
Sure.
Is there no chance to leave the terrain modification as a siloed type of vote or process rather than putting it into this updated LPA code? I guess is that how how we're describing it?
So is the question whether we need to adopt the manual?
Yeah, so like, because you made the comment, when it comes to terrain modification, it's going in with all these other changes that we're rewriting our LPAs, right?
Yes.
If the terrain modification thing still was, I mean, it's like, it's either like you can get all these changes done, but it includes terrain modification. The only way you can get those changes done is if you are on board with the terrain modification. Is there any chance that the terrain modification could be siloed or separated, so then we could still focus on our regular, you know, revisions that we've been making? And I know that I'm the outlier here because there's been a lot of work by staff and by consultants and everybody involved in the terrain modification, and I understand the purpose of it, as I've mentioned before, but reviewing it, understanding it a little bit more, you know, coming up against some internal struggles in regards to being like on board for it. So like I was asking the question today in this meeting to say, you know, can I be on board with the LPA, and then can we, me personally, have the terrain modification be a separate item?
So the way that it works is right now, the way that it's proposed right now, it is integral to 8 different chapters of the land development regulations. So the way that they are written now, they're accommodating terrain and fill and all of those things. So to pull that apart would be to reapproach this completely. And if there are other changes in here, like in the building code that we need to make, we would just be instructed to come back and make those changes. You know, that would be our guidance, is we don't want terrain, but we want to update the code. As you all know, we're going through a major rewrite of our whole code with a different consultant that's more focused on the LDR part of it, the land development regulation part of it. So these are only addressing, unless it's like a glaring conflict,
Yeah.
things to do with terrain.
Okay.
Like, for instance, we'll be bringing you proposals for fence wall, hedges, retaining walls, because
That,
you have to address that
yeah,
when you
with
look
terrain
at terrain.
modification, it changes it.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I'm not trying to crush anybody. I just,
Yeah.
the terrain modification thing, I have, my opinion on it is, I'm struggling, like I said, a little bit with it, because I just feel like when it comes to where the city wants to go, and I get that it's a 100-year outlook, but you know, you look around, you drive around, you bike around, you walk around, and I just feel like there's some type of struggles that currently exist, and I'm concerned that the terrain modification, or Elevate TI, aka, could potentially hinder that potential growth or that type of progression. Now, there's 2 different ways to look at it. Obviously, it could obviously help. It may attract people, but I don't know if we need to be looking at other things to help. You know, if we're gonna say we prefer you to go through this Elevate TI process through this code, what maybe we need to be looking at other things that we could potentially give whether that's height, whether that's density, whatever it may be. I just feel like that's something that we may have to review.
Okay, well, included in the proposal is this height adjustment factor, as we call it. So you're not losing height with the program.
We've gone through that.
Okay,
Like I
I
know
just-
that.
I
know
wanted to be
you go
clear.
up 2
Yeah.
feet, you still get your 2 feet. I understand
Yeah.
that we're not squeezing people. Okay.
I mean, I see where Ross is coming from. I mean, why wouldn't you come to us and say, hey, let's make sure everybody's on board? I mean,
I just feel I'm getting a lot of there's a lot of questions. I mean, I was out just walking, you know, with my son, and someone had pulled me over and like, oh, hey, I've seen you on the meetings. Like, you know, I have concerns about this Elevate TI thing and this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay. And then, you know, the other day I was not even on Treasure Island, I was in Publix, because I don't go to this Publix. It's 33% more cost impact. But anyway, you know, and people were asking those questions. And again, Catherine, I know that you have spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this, so I don't want to be that person that's adverse to the whole motion of where this is going, but I just have to ask that question because it just seems like there's a lot of things, and my initial question was more along the, yeah, I understand we need changes here, is it going to automatically include this terrain modification? And like, it's a struggle for me because I know administratively, we just had 3 applicants come through. Our packet was 500 pages. So now we've got terrain modification. That book alone is, I think you said 500 pages. I know that I haven't read the entire book.
Well, let me back that one up a little bit, because really the manual itself is not 500. The supplement with every point in the city and all the elevations is probably 300 pages. I don't have it in front of me, but but you're going to be looking at your specific development type. So you're not going to have to look at the whole book. And from a civil engineering perspective, I think that might be a good thing to bring some in and talk to them about what it means to them from designing a site. But it literally is, it's a drainage equation that they have to do anyway. It's just a different, it's a different cookbook, I guess, for how to do your drainage.
And I get that, and I know that that's important for where we
Yeah.
want to go. A real life example that I'm thinking about just in present day is like the Treasure Bay situation, right? So today there's no permit to reconstruct Treasure Bay. I get that. We have Elevate TI. Let's say Elevate TI comes in. Okay. Well, now we're talking about lifting.
Mm-hmm.
Does Elevate TI impact the reconstruction project of potentially a renovation of a golf course? It technically would, right? Because you're lifting it.
The seawall or the buildings, yes.
Okay. So there, I mean, I'm saying that there's some
Yeah.
there's some impact there, and I get that.
Right.
Again, I want to be glass half full approach where it comes to, yeah, it should be. The golf course elevated is a good idea, or the buildings elevated is a good idea, but also that's more work. We could potentially be more money. It could. We don't know that yet. I mean, I think that question that we had earlier was interesting. So, not only the Treasure Bay situation, but our downtown area, our other areas, the other areas that are empty. I'm trying to figure out what is the hindrance of progress that it's taking place, and I just need to make it clear that the Elevate TI thing, I think, could potentially be an additional hindrance to that type of growth and opportunity for people to invest in Treasure Island.
Not trying to advocate, but just to let you know that the people we're talking to are mostly wanting to elevate. So, for instance, we had a meeting with the church on Paradise, and they need to redo their seawall. It's about 50-something years old. They know that this is coming. They're very excited to be able to pull that seawall up, use that fill, push that seawall up, and protect their property, because they're looking at long-term, really long-term protecting their property. So the feedback has been mostly positive. I mean, people have concerns because it's complex.
Yeah.
Being very honest, we're explaining it the best we can without an adopted code of what this would mean for your particular property, because we have people coming in and saying, I want to wait and I want to do this with the new fill regulations, because people really want to raise their seawalls. And so it kind of all comes together, like raising your house, raising your seawall, raising the roads. It kind of comes in a package.
Yeah, but the church isn't raising
The church. Fortunately, the church is actually high. We have their ancient elevation certificate from 20-something years ago. And when they did an addition, so we were able to, kind of
And I
have that conversation about them being able to raise their seawall. Yes, because you don't want to put the church in a bowl. Obviously, we all know that. But the way the terrain modification manual works, it would say you can't, because obviously you don't want to put your building in a bowl.
Okay. All right.
One of the things I just want to add with the ordinances that are before you, right now and being considered, is many of the changes that are being proposed in those ordinances are tied directly to the terrain modification. So there are 9 ordinances that will travel together. You're getting them in individual slices.
Correct.
But if the decision if the decision is to move forward with terrain modification, these are the 9 that need to happen. If the decision was to not move forward with terrain modification, then the staff would not be proposing these 9 ordinances. There are other changes I will tell you that like for instance, the fire code change that we're talking about in 8, that one we'd just bring back in a different ordinance. Because it's something that we thought, well, while we're amending it, we'll go ahead and add that in, fix that, fix that issue. So there are things within the ordinance that would be brought back separately that are cleanup items. And while we have that section of the code open, we're choosing to clean it up. But if that helps answer the question that you had.
It does. I'm just concerned about, you want some of these other stuff cleaned up, but then the Elevate TI thing causes concerns. I just feel like they're kind of stuck together type thing.
Well,
From a voting perspective. Do I have that wrong?
No, I understand what you're saying. I will tell you, I don't think there are many items in these ordinances that aren't affiliated with the terrain mod manual. I think they're like the fire one is, and I think there was
the cleanup in 8 is because it's old. It's really old, and we just had to
I get it.
but I think the majority in 66.
clean it up.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
We'll leave it for 7, but from a discussion standpoint, if someone can just walk me through the timeline then of what's
Sure.
take place for meetings and things like that,
Sure.
then I would greatly.
Well, that's why we wanted to bring you these ordinances in small workshops, because I don't think you want to workshop
No.
9 ordinances in one day. And I don't think you want to adopt 9 ordinances without having workshopped them individually. So that's why, as they're ready, we are working very hard to churn these out, and we would have more for you if we could, but everything is more complex than any of us think. And so, we're making sure that they're not unforeseen consequences of changing things, because every one of these changes seems to be rolling into another part of the code, and that's what we're trying to track.
I get how complex it is.
Yeah.
And I'm not bagging on the city, but adding more complexity to our entire situation actually does give me fear. I'm just,
No, I'm glad we're having this
we're not like
conversation.
the highest power, we're not a real high-powered city when you
Yeah.
comes to looking around. I mean, I know we got this big fancy building, but I'm with you. Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm glad we're having this
to figure it
conversation,
out.
because it's important, because what would happen with Chapter 8, for instance, is just come back to you with only the changes that needed for housekeeping,
Okay. Thank you.
because I don't think it's gone through its 3-year cycles of readoption.
Okay.
So we're kind of looking back a long way. We're on page 37. We just talked about those 2 things, the terrain manual and the address. The next changes would be just to clarify what goes in your application for a permit. So we are just describing the forms, the FEMA forms that are needed, and the how to do a substantial damage or substantial improvement application. So that's really just the paperwork confirmation of what forms we were using. Page 39, once again, references the terrain manual. And then we go into definitions on page 39. The new definitions are start on page 40. First one is a building. We wanted that to simplify that. We had many definitions of a building in every single chapter of our code that were all different. So this is coming straight out of the Florida Building Code, and it is short and clear. So we figured that is the best one to use, especially since the floodplain code has to seg into the building code, because the Florida Building Code deals a lot with flood management. The next change will be at the bottom of that same page, where we talk about natural grade. So we've come up with some new terms. Natural grade, we'll get to in a moment, what that means. Then on page 41, you will see there are 3 FEMA forms that we describe which ones to use. We've just been getting a lot of paperwork that just doesn't meet the FEMA standards, so we just wanted to be quite clear about which forms you need to use, not something that you got out of the archive from 20 years ago that you have at your office, that you need to use the current adopted FEMA forms. Because we get audited by FEMA, and if we don't have all our ducks in a row, then we're not in good shape. So we've been very strict on pushing back on these, but we just wanted to lay it out in code. The next thing is fill. We have a description of fill. material including but not limited to soil, gravel, or crushed stone that is placed in an area to increase ground elevations, which is different than structural fill. And then we have finished grade, and that's the finished grade after you do fill. The next changes roll over to page 44, where we go into natural grade, and that is the pre-fill. So we're using those terms in the manual, we're using those terms in this section of the code to describe how much you can fill and what the fill is measured from. And then we have a definition of non-structural fill, which is not supporting the structure. So might be a parking slab under a house, which is not supporting the structure above it. It's supporting the parking slab, but nothing else. I'm sorry, non-structural fill. And then we go on the next page, on page 45, structural fill. And that's compacted fill, which does provide structural support. Once again, structure, straight out of the building code. Substantial improvement, this is something we discussed a lot prior. This was the 5-year period, which is a cumulative 49%. This begins when a permit is issued, starting on whatever date we trigger this, whether it's August 1st, September 1st, whatever. We're going to give people time after adoption before this goes into effect, even though we've made huge outreach on all of this. On the next page, page 46, this is where we get into everything that came out of the building code and came over here to live in the, this is a real mix, because a lot of this was in the floodplain code, it's been reorganized, or it was in the building code and it came over here. So it's a good mix. The forms, once again, we are just making sure that this is the kind of administrative part, this is the FEMA forms, once again, saying these are the forms you have to use. The next part, this whole section, 1, A, B, and C, is all about forms. No real change to what we're doing, it's just codifying what we require. The next part begins the actual changes that came over from the building code. So this is substantial damage and substantial improvement shall be as defined in this chapter. So we're saying, okay, we've moved all this out of the building code into our chapter and have our definition. These minimum building elevations on page 47, these are the same as they always were. It's 2 feet above freeboard for the living space. The foundation design requirements, we moved that over, that was always required. The enclosures below required elevations, this was all in here. We just moved it into a different section so it applies to all buildings. The only difference is we accepted those commercial buildings that are either purely commercial or commercial areas of mixed-use structures, i.e. downtown. We allow those to be partitioned when they're dry flood-proofed. So that's, that was a big problem with downtown development that I don't think anybody realized. And when we were looking at this code, we said we've got to address that in order to facilitate this mixed-use vision that we have for downtown, where we've got commercial on the ground floor, quote unquote. And the ground floor may now be 2 feet above where the ground floor would be today, but that's not a substantial change as was discussed by the condo developer that was here earlier. It's really fill. So none of these are either already in the building code, enhancements of the building code, or were already in the floodplain code. So what's new is the exception and the substantial damage, substantial improvement definitions. Next changes we get to are on page 48. Once again, a reference to the manual. And then we have the manual again, and then we go down to the bottom of page 48, section 66-303.5. The changes to allow non-structural fill of up to 24 inches, which you'll see there. Everything else is pretty much carried over from the previous code. Other things in this section, the number D was in a different part of the code. It was just moved here for consistency. And then in number 2, in the middle of page 49, in areas that are not coastal high hazard and coastal A, they need to meet the building code and the terrain mod manual, and then they can have fill. So those are the 2 criteria for fill. And then on bottom of page 49, all we did was add a definition for manufactured homes coming out of the state statutes. That's more of a house cleaning thing. And housekeeping, underground tanks, we adopted some language from FEMA, from their FEMA guidance in there. So,
Question.
sure,
The manufactured home things.
yes.
You're saying that was always in our,
Yes, we are not a permitted use in the city.
they are not.
Always have never been.
Okay. Even if someone put in pilings and bolted one on the top of it?
No, but there is,
I'm seeing some,
in the statutes, there is a difference between a modular home, which is a factory-built home, and a manufactured home, which is like a chassis, on a chassis.
okay,
Those are 2 different things under the Florida statutes.
okay.
So a modular home is a permitted use, but that's built on, on same kind of structure as anything else, a garage structure with pilings, nowadays, or without, depending on what flood zone it's in. And it may come in pieces to the site, like 4 modules,
Yeah.
but that is different than, it's built different. It's built to the Florida Building Code.
Okay.
As compared to the other one. It's just licensed differently by the state.
Amazing. Thank you, Ms. Catherine.
You are welcome. Going on to page 51, we added in coastal high hazard and coastal A zones, we added that you can't have a turned down slab. That's just clarifying something about construction. Because those have to be frangible. They have to be breakaway, washable, wash-away walls, wash-away slabs. Changes we made to decks and patios in coastal high hazard areas. We talked about them being no more than 24 inches above grade. That's because of the fill requirement for decks. Decks or patios. We just struck some language in what is now 4B. And then on page 52, we added a reference to the manual, and that's the changes we have to those. They'll come back to you in a finalized ordinance form with correct sections and numbering and all that good thing, but the content is basically as proposed, with the exception of the fire code, which we need to get clarity from the fire chief.
That thing on the bottom of 51 where you
Yes.
said it's 4B, that's still gonna be 3B. Just,
Okay, oh,
Housekeeping.
see, there's typos, yes.
yeah, that's okay. No,
We
you
were,
guys did
we were,
great.
we were all collectively in a hurry to get this one done.
That looks
so
great.
It should be 3.
It'd just be B there.
Oh, this is, yeah, 3A and
By the
3B.
way, the
3,
A was done.
yep.
Yeah.
So our plan is to bring you ordinances in sections like this as we get them prepared, and then come back however many hearings we need to have to get to a final adoption hearing. Or not adopt.
But they were saying the August 1st thing, right? Isn't that what some
So
of the?
that was an early target, thinking that we would be done at LPA in June
Okay.
and going to commission 3 times in July.
So we're in May today. we
So
got,
we're probably a month. I have to look at
So August 1's definitely-
Stacy's latest email, but it's not going to be August 1.
it's not going to be August 1. Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys still work on, like you said, putting this together as one packet. Do we have any other departments or avenues that will be in front of us for the next LPA meeting when it comes to updating this?
We will have more sections of
More sections.
more sections of the code to workshop.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. How many more sections?
hopefully.
He wants to say all of them, but she's not
Hopefully
gonna.
all of them.
Okay. Well, no, because I know you've been breaking it
Yes.
up. You've been doing the different
Yes.
things. So are we done with the breakup portions of it?
Like moving them and that part of
Yeah.
it? Yes, yes.
Okay.
And you've had kind of the introductory big picture of
Correct.
the big ideas. Like, there are 3 related to utilities. Those are just, one is new, which is just a stormwater chapter.
I got you.
And one is taking all the other utilities and cleaning that up, basically. And the other one is more of the rates and finance and fees and process, right?
So we
So
go.
those are pretty straightforward, other than the real new thing is stormwater.
Right, yeah, you,
So
previously.
there's 3 chapters, but it's really 1.
Just like these are interrelated in that we were moving things from 8 to 66, you have, currently in the code, there are 2 provisions that deal with utilities. One is in the land development regulations and one is outside the land development regulations. And then there's this new introduction of stormwater. And so we're kind of tailoring all 3 of those and putting things where they should be.
Belong.
So you've got those 3 ordinances. You'll have the ordinance that adopts or doesn't the terrain modification manual, and then you'll have 68
68
and
and
69.
69.
So 68, there are some changes within the zoning code that'll, like Catherine was talking about with regard to retaining walls and hedges and fences. So there are some changes in that particular chapter of the code that relate to terrain. And then 69, which you've been briefed on, which is the seawalls. And so that'll be coming back for you in an ordinance form. And so all of those we're hoping to bring at that time.
Okay.
And they'll be workshopped,
Yes.
just like these were workshopped.
Okay.
Well, I like the approach of us just going and looking at the changes. I like this approach. It cuts through it a little bit better for us.
Yeah, because there's a lot of words, but there's not a lot of changes to these 2, for instance. It's more like a reorganization in this case. And the building code, to be honest, a much-needed update, just to the code references.
All right. Catherine, good for 6B of your presentation? All good? Anybody additional questions? All right, local planning agency issues, comments, or discussion? Does anybody have anything LPA related? Okay. Reports of city attorney, staff, and board members. None? Nothing?
Give me a minute.
Next, next LPA meeting, we talked about it in planning and zoning, June 27th. It says it's at 3 PM. That's obviously contingent on the timing is contingent on the agenda for the planning and zoning. But I do like having them on the same day, so I appreciate staff's working ability to make that happen for us.
Can I ask one question about that?
Yeah.
If we wanted to start early, we don't know how many P and Z cases we have, and probably will know that in a week or 2, but we have a whole bunch of pending cases, and some finally make it through the starting gate.
Okay.
Like these 3 today have been around for a while. You'll notice that parking lot has a 2022 case number. But would you be available to start early that day? Just kind of taking a
When you
straw
say
poll?
early,
7th, absolutely not.
Okay,
This morning, early stuff is just not conducive for me.
okay. Anybody else?
When you say early, are you talking about like 10 a.m. or are you talking
11,
about like?
12, 1? Like, just know that it might be a heavy day, and,
I mean, usually it's just set, it's a known thing that it's 2 p.m. I mean.
right.
there was some
Yeah, P and Z stands at 2, and I'd like to keep that if we can, but then it might be a long day.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
I just have it blocked in my calendar.
Okay.
For Thursday or.
Okay,
whatever.
that's actually the fourth Thursday.
It
We
is.
actually had to move that because of the city manager interviews and
You can't
commission
go-
decision
You can't
day.
go past 5 o'clock, right? We can't go past 5, can we, or?
We
As long
can,
as there's no other meetings in this
yeah,
facility.
no, we should be fine. We can
So we're
book it
gonna
out.
stay 2 o'clock,
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, okay.
please. Yep.
And if we just have to run late, we'll
We
run
can
late.
run late, yeah, and I'll just book it on the
Past, we've had
calendar
to
late,
Stop before we're finished because
yeah. And if it's running really late, like we have a really heavy case, we can always take a break for half an hour and have some snacks and, make it not so, yeah.
Okay. Any public comments?
Thank you, thank you for that.
And adjournment.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.